foot two, eyes of blue. But oh, what those 5 foot could do. Has anybody seen my gal? Turned up nose, turned down hose, never had no other clothes. Has anybody seen my gal?
Continuing our conversation with Sesame Street's Bob McGrath, today on Pop Goes the Culture. Welcome back to Pop Goes the Culture. I'm David Levin, and I am continuing my conversation with the great Bob McGrath of Sesame Street. So now you're singing with Sing Along with Mitch, and
right.
you're doing the weekly solo.
Right.
You're starting to get recognized.
Yeah, a lot, and recognized here, and what ultimately ended up. Then we started doing after this. Then it's all the way through. So I was doing club dates, national convention club dates, and some of those popped up. But I was more than enough busy just doing the show. It was 40 hours for each 1 hour show. And I was still doing a few, off-camera jingles and commercials and stuff like that. And I think that's when I got that was when I got my best on-camera, which was the Doublemint gum. Mr. Wrigley loved myself. I can't think of the girl's name right now. I will in a moment. And because we did a lot of duet-type things together. And so we replaced the Doublemint gum girls.
You weren't a twin, though.
No, not a twin. We didn't look anything alike.
And how'd that go? Double your pleasure.
You love Doublemint gum, double good Doublemint. And it paid handsomely, which was wonderful. And then when the show finally got canceled, and I ran all the way through that, we did Las Vegas we were booked for a couple of weeks, and they were all saying, well, it was an old-timey show. It's never going to last in Vegas. And we were sold out every night, and they extended for another 2 or 3 weeks. So that was that. Now, in the second year of the show, and I started doing a solo every week, that was when NHK in Japan picked up the show. And after Vegas, we were booked for 1 full month doing 30 concerts, one every night, all across from the top of Japan, from Hokkaido to Fukuoka, south, a concert every night. And fortunately for me, Leslie Uggams was busy in Vegas and wasn't there, so I had a chance to do 4 or 5 solos, a couple in Japanese, the rest in English, and 2 or 3 other guys did some solos. But our audience here was like 40 or 50 until you die, and we expected an older audience there. But every night we had anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 teenagers in the audience, and we looked for what is this? So when you asked them, they said, "We love to watch Michi Mirror.
Michi Mirror.
we learned to sing English because at the end of the show, the songs we sang clearly." And all the lyrics were projected, so it was like a perfect English language learning lesson. But every time I got up to do a solo, we had all these teenagers screaming, "Babu, Babu, Babu, Madura." So the booker said, "What's going on?" I said, "I have no idea, Tatsunakashima." And so he had his agents look around Japan, and it turned out there were Babu Madura's fan clubs all over Japan. So at the end of the tour, he said, "How would you like to come back and open the top 2 clubs in Tokyo in the fall?" And I said,
So you're like Lennon and McCartney, basically. And,
I was.
Did they scream?
I was a hot thing. Oh, screaming, yeah, and all that kind of stuff. So I said, "Great, I'm out of a job, no problem." So I worked very, very hard. I locked myself in the car down in Voti Park, so I didn't know it. And for months, I memorized more Japanese songs and more English songs. A whole new show. Had all the arrangements done because everybody had a big band. It was like a Sinatra band, 15 pieces with full brass woodwinds and everything. Every major nightclub has that. And so I went over and I had my wife come over. It was a 6-week tour for concerts and so forth. And it worked out really, really well. I had all those teenagers filling my concert halls and doing the screaming thing.
That's
and
awesome.
Getting mugged, and not mugged, but mobbed. And it got scary a couple of times. But I've learned for the first time what it would like to be, squished.
This is like 65,
this
66?
Would be 1965, 6, 67. So one tour ended up into 9 tours, 3 a year for about 6 weeks at a time.
Wow.
And I was doing everything from I signed with Columbia Records, which then became part of Sony, and did about 8 or 9 LPs and 40 or 50 singles, and these were all selling hot. And They were doing covers of Andy Williams and Perry Como, On the Street We Live, and More, and all those kind of hit songs. And it was incredible.
So we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you are the last of the 25 guys from Mitch Miller?
Yeah, they were wonderful guys, and there were only 2 or 3 younger in their 30-ish when we started. And the last of those younger guys, Phil Olson, who was a very close friend from New Jersey, and he had a beautiful tenor voice and taught in the college here. And he passed away some months ago, so I'm the last of the 25.
Wow. So you're the living legacy of Mitch Miller, basically.
I suppose so, and Mitch passed away some years ago, and we did a wonderful tribute for him at his funeral and so forth. Not a funeral, but a sitting kind of thing. And yeah, so, I mean, that was like my first life almost. I didn't mention when I was in college, getting my master's, this is a little insert. My first day in New York, a friend of mine in Germany, when I was with the 7th Army Symphony, said, "Do you know anybody in New York?" I said, "Not at all." He said, "Go knock on my roommate's door and tell him to give you a drink." I said, "Okay, fine." He was on 89th Street. I did. And I said, "Looking for a job, looking for a place to live." He said, "Go across the street to Bishop Furlong. They have a paid quartet there." Did that. Got that job. Said, "You know anybody in the parish that has an empty room going to college?" "No, but there's a private school across the street called St. David's Boys' School right next to the Guggenheim." And he said, "I think the Latin teacher just got married, and I think he lived on the top floor while he taught." I said, "Okay." Went over, knocked on the door. In the office was the office lady, secretary, and an older lady, and a very attractive young girl and woman. And so I got to see the headmaster, who was very young. And he said, "What's up?" I told him. He said, "What you're really looking for is a free sack, right?" And I said, "Well, you could say that, but..." He said, "What can you do?" I said, he said, "Can you start a Gregorian chant choir here?" Because it was a Catholic school run by all lay faculty. And so I'll cut to the chase, but I said yes, did that, and taught in theory and music appreciation, whatever, from 2nd grade through 8th grade. It's a great private school. And turned out, bottom line, I used to observe the preschool teacher and see what her methods were, and ultimately I married her. So on my first day,
I thought I saw that might be where you were leading on this, so I don't have to ask. I was going to ask you something about that.
So on the first day in New York, I got a free drink, I got a job, I got a place to live, and he said, "If you sweet talk the cook, you can get all you can eat as long as you're here." I did that, got all my meals, and ended up getting a wife 2 years later.
And you've been married
56 years, I think it is, since 1958.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, so it was a good first day. I called home and I said, New York isn't all that tough at the gig.
One day is all it takes to change your life, isn't it?
Boy, that changed. There was 2 things. That was my second. The first one was when I got that scholarship, not a scholarship, and suggested to go to music school instead of engineering. And this was a definite change in my life. Going there and having the opportunity to sing with Mitch was another major,
having that stable environment to sort of build with, and then you get married, you're doing it. Seems like you're doing it right. You go, you have a full job, and you're doing what you love to do.
Absolutely. I've never done anything. I've never had to, except at home, wash a dish. I've used my voice to make all my entire living since when I was doing it professionally, since getting out of the Army in 56. It's been a wonderful life. Interestingly enough, one of my teachers I did study privately was Sergius Kogan. He was at Juilliard School of Music, and he was from Vienna with a very wonderful Viennese thick accent. And I said to him one day, I said, "Boy, am I lucky." He said, "How is that?" And I said, "I just got a job with Mitch Miller. It's going to be a great, great job." And he said, "Luck has very little to do with it." And I said, "What?" And he said, "If you weren't prepared," he said, "there'd be 10 guys waiting in line to do it." And I thought, that's true. There is a little bit of luck, but the preparation and giving a little more than anybody expects you to give, I've found has worked well for me. I'm always early on a date, because if you're recording when the second hand goes by, your downbeat is on that second hand. So it's a wonderful, wonderful profession, and can be very challenging, but I've been, if not lucky, very, very fortunate after working very hard at it.
So you did the Mitch Miller thing. You did the tour of Japan.
Right.
I have a feeling I know where we're headed.
After 9 tours, I was invited back, but I thought I'm away from home too much. It was tough on my wife with 5 children at that point, being alone for 6 weeks. So I turned down my last tour and wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And I thought, you know, I may have to do a little bit of acting. I had done summer stock and stuff, but I had never, quote, acted. So I joined HB Studios and did some improv and scene studies, etc., for a year. And fortunately, right after that, I bumped into an old fraternity brother and a guy that I washed dishes with at the Alpha Phi House at Michigan, Dave Connell. And he said, what are you doing? Hasn't seen him. He had just come off the Captain Kangaroo show as a director, producer.
Wow.
And he said, what do you, I said, well, I'm looking around. He said, I think I'm going to be getting involved in a new kids show. He said, would you be interested in auditioning? And at this point, before I give you the punchline, I wanted to be the new Andy Williams, Perry Como, who were incredibly successful on NBC, great, classy shows, because that was my audience in Japan.
Right.
I thought I'll just transfer what I've been doing there. I was doing all their covers over there. And so I looked at him and I said, not in the least. And so he said, okay, and we parted. But a month or two later, he called my wife, Nancy. He said, tell Bob to come in. We've got a guy by the name of Jim Henson, never heard of. Got Muppets, what are they? And might take a look at some animation film. I went in and took me 2.5 minutes to say, forget all that teenage stuff. I want to do this show.
Okay, so this is what I want to hear.
All right.
I want to hear, first of all, I was going to say to you earlier, actually this morning I was thinking about it. I was thinking, my wife, she grew up on Sesame Street. For me, I was a little bit older.
Right.
And I grew up on Captain Kangaroo.
Yeah.
So now it's nice to hear that there is a direct line from Captain Kangaroo to Sesame Street for someone like me, to know that.
Very direct. Not only was Dave Connell, but we had 4 major people who really were at the helm, along with Joan Gans Cooney, who was her brainchild, to start Sesame Street because Head Start funds were being cut. She said it just is not fair that these inner city kids are not getting good education. They can learn commercials in 13 seconds, so why don't we base one of our show on that? So,
what were your first thoughts when you went in and they showed you, he invites you in.
Yeah.
I want you to walk me into that room. What you're thinking and what happened?
Well, they showed me some animations which were more clever than anything I'd seen. They showed some Muppet pieces with Jim and Frank Oz doing little bits and pieces. They showed the pieces they did with the children. And I thought, oh, this is the most refreshing thing I've ever seen. No more, Kangaroo was good. Fred Rogers was incredible, and he was 1 year ahead of us. But this was on a whole different level that really perked my mind. This is up to the moment, clever, great stuff.
You knew you were seeing something you had never been done.
Never had seen anything like this before. You'd seen a gazillion cartoons and animations, and you'd seen Disney, but this had a whole different focus in life, and a great focus, going to reach every level of child and help them do better in school. Yeah. And so I didn't really do much of an audition. They knew I was a professional singer. They knew I had education background, etc., with the teaching. So I think I kind of fit the mold. They had 4 or 5 names picked out for one of the 4 characters. The other was Mr. Hooper, who became Will Lee, Susan, who became Loretta Long, and Gordon, who was Matt Robinson. And then they had a 4th character, and I think they thought he was going to be a musician of some sort and teach and be involved with music. And they had 4 or 5 names picked out, and one of them was Bobby, strangely enough. And I said, well, I was called that till I was 7. If you can just cut that to Bob, I'll probably answer faster than to George or Jimmy or something. And so they say, fine, Bob's good. And so...
so you're the only character that sort of had your own name.
I was the only one. It turned out to be very, very fortunate because the spin-off from Sesame Street, which started almost in the first season of the Cleveland Orchestra asking me to come out and do one of their family pops concerts, and I had never done a symphony concert. I had done everything else. But that really paid off. The contract says on the marquee or wherever, it can be Bob McGrath 100% type size, of Sesame Street 50% type size, because they never wanted to be confused that this was a Sesame Street show. because people could be misled and expect to see the bird walk out with me and so forth. And so that all started. It was
okay. So let's go. How much?
I'll let you get a question in.
Please. So okay. So
like
start.
Nice guy.
Start. Well, you know, I do what I can. I fooled you too. Then. So you go in. You have your audition. You say, okay, I'm in. I'm 100%. So how long between you coming in and the show, you know, getting shot and prepped, how much were you involved in sort of helping to get those first? Did you come in, you were just an actor? Or
I came in, no. I should say, they really had their act together. 2 years prior to the first show ever going on the air, they had a whole staff of researchers and of writers and everything else. But particularly the research department worked for 2 years with every child expert you can think of, psychiatrist, psychologist, you name it, to put together what they thought might be a curriculum for the show. And they tested, this is interesting, they tested all this with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And one of the things was a distractor test. And in a room with a one-way glass where they could see the children, they had them watching the show, and in 2 corners. In one corner of the room was Sesame Street in black and white. The other would be a cartoon in color, so it gave the cartoon the option, the advantage of being in color and animated, and the other. And every 6, 7 seconds, they had their people in there checking to see where the eyeballs were. So they went through a lot of material they thought was great. They didn't pass the test there, and then they finally, after a lot of this, they wrote the first 130 shows. We did 130 shows per season. During the first
130 hours, not just 130 shows, 130 full hours without commercial breaks.
Exactly.
Got it.
However, of course, the human parts of it, because a lot of it was animation, film, and Muppets and everything.
And repetitions.
But I think we probably had 18, 20 minutes of live action in those first 1-hour shows. It was a full-time job, to put it mildly, to do over the course of about, I think, 6 months, 4 or 5, 6 months would take us to do that many shows. And so that it sort of blew the top off the television right from the very beginning. We knew from the beginning that it was going to be very successful from the feedback.
So let's talk about your shooting it sort of in a vacuum for however many months before it aired for the first time.
Not too many. We were probably only, I don't know exactly, but I think we tried to stay at least 4 or 5 months. I might be off on this a little bit. We tried to stay 4 or 5 months ahead of an air date. At least.
So okay.
Because they did a lot of editing if it didn't work.
Yeah, of course. And it took a long time at that point. Yeah. So you during those couple of months, you're trying out material, you're shooting.
But it was mostly all for air. There was very little went on the cutting room floor.
And did the music start coming at that point?
Oh, absolutely.
When did you start?
Joan and all the people that were running this knew that music was going to be a very, very important part. The other major component, of course, that Joan knew from the very beginning, she knew she wanted Jim Henson to be a major portion of this show. And so there's a lot of detail to that, which I won't go into, but the whole Jim Henson organization came up, and Jim and Frank Oz and with all of the Muppets, and they, of course, did all of the pieces written for the Muppets and so forth. So that was all in place. We just came in as talent, the 4 of us, and we were expected to memorize every comma on our scripts. There was no prompters or anything of that sort, but it was shot very intelligently. We'd run it 2 or 3 times on the floor, and then do a test and see if it worked, and pickups and all the kind of stuff you know about.
Right. We're going to be back next time with more of Bob McGrath.